when I was a kid, all I really cared about was listening to punk rock records, going to skate all day. I dropped out of high school when I was in ninth grade.
Today on Time We Discuss, I have Christopher Stockwell with me. Christopher, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, Christopher, you were a prosecutor. What was it like being a prosecutor? What are some of the daily things that you would do at that point in time?
Prosecution is prosecuting, criminal charges, and that's what we do. And not everybody loves us, but it's kind of like one of those jobs, like somebody's going to have to do this, somebody's going to be in this office doing it. So who do you want? You want someone like me, or do you want someone who's a jerk? So
Please don't like you. So when you first started to go down this road, when you got out of law school, is this something that you deliberately chose to do, or did this find you? Did you try other avenues of law first? How did that all unfold for you?
I didn't actually get licensed as a lawyer until right about my 40th birthday. Before that, I worked in these service sector jobs. I worked as an EMT, paramedic. I just bounced around all over the place before I settled down. I got married, I had kids, I went back to college, I went to law school. I was always interested in workers' rights issues because I'd always been in, my union, active in my union, or shop steward, or just involved with like workers' issues in the workplace when I worked in those other jobs. So when I went to law school, I went to law school because I figured that I would be a government lawyer working in some aspect of, like workers' rights, like at the EEOC or the Department of Labor. And I did a bunch of those internships, but what I ended up settling on was doing my own private practice as a workers' rights attorney and a plaintiff's employment attorney. So basically like a discrimination and wrongful termination attorney. I did that for several years. And then, COVID happened and I had kind of a downturn in the practice. And I saw the prosecutor's job posted, and I really didn't have any criminal background. So I didn't figure that they would give me an interview, but they were looking for experienced lawyers. And so, and other times I probably wouldn't have been considered for that job because I just didn't really have a lot of interest in in criminal law. Most people in a prosecutor's office, they spend their time in law school interning in prosecutors' offices, learning criminal justice, I just happened to slide in there at a point in time when, there was kind of a lull. We had just had a change at the top. The city attorney was a much more conservative city attorney. It caused an exodus in the office of existing attorneys. And I got in there, and I stayed for a couple of years because I really wanted to knock out a bunch of trial work because I wasn't getting a lot of trial work as a civil attorney. I did it for a couple of years, and then I popped back out of it and reopened this solo practice as a plaintiff's employment attorney again.
How difficult was it for you to transition from one, I'm going to call it a specialty, from one type of specialty to another? How difficult was that?
It's a pretty big shift because, like law school is really like two tracks. And the thing about it is that criminal justice is actually a much smaller portion of the legal field than civil practice, because civil practice is like everything in society. It's 90% of, every single document practically, at some point in time had a lawyer's eyes on it, or, is going to be reviewed by a lawyer. Every issue, that's all civil stuff. And the thing is, we go to law school and the first class we take is criminal law. Criminal law, criminal procedure. For a lot of us, that's the last, criminal related course that we ever take, because we all go into like the different, I want to do property, or I want to do construction or employment, or we go into some aspect of civil law, and we don't really see criminal law again until we go to sit down and take a bar exam, and we take a refresher, and then we answer the bar questions about it, and then it's the last we really ever think of it. So it's a pretty big jump. And I always think that to be a criminal attorney, I think that we should have some more avenues where you don't have to actually go to 3 years of law school, because you need like a year of law school if you're going to be like licensed just to do criminal law. I mean, you really just need like a year of law school and like a much more limited, bar exam, because you can definitely do that like that. So anyway, I guess the point I'm saying is that I mean, there's definitely carryover. It's definitely the same profession, but it's very, very different. It took me a while to get my feet underneath me, but the thing about it is that there was a ton of really experienced prosecutors there that were really like good to learn from. There were just good people, and then there was a lot of like brand new, like law school noobs that didn't know anything. So it worked out pretty well. You know what I mean? And there's so much turnover in the city attorney's office in Seattle that I was actually one of the senior. By the time I left, I was like pretty high on the seniority list, believe it or not.
Let me ask you this. I noticed at one point, you had your arm up. It looked like you had some tattoos on your forearm.
Yeah.
So I love it, by the way. That is awesome. My wife and I were talking about tattoos the other day, and we're talking about it as it relates to people when they're working professionally. And from your experience, do a lot of attorneys have ink? Does that seem to hinder people working with you at all? Did you have to wear long sleeve shirts if you have ink? What's that like?
I mean, I can only speak for, the Pacific Northwest, but, like here in Seattle, I mean, unless I was like, like levitating down the street with my hair on fire, like nobody's really going to give me a second glance. If I was, I don't know, someplace else, like, I don't want to, like pick places out of a hat. But I mean, if I was someplace maybe, like down in the, kind of Bible Belt area, maybe it might be a little bit less professional. But I mean, I remember, it's like when I go into court, when I work for the city attorneys, I would go into, municipal court several times a week. And, if I was doing hearings, like bail hearings in the morning, or I'm doing pretrial hearings, or if I'm in a trial, it's like, I can, put on sleeves and you can't see any of my tattoos. I mean, all you can see is the ones on my arms. I have tattoos on my body too. And I feel like for like a guy that's about 50 years old who grew up in Seattle and Tacoma, I have a very average amount of tattoos. So it's like nobody really like looks at me weird because everybody else my age around here is covered in tattoos too. But like in Seattle Municipal Court, like if I was going in because like one of my like coworkers, like is in trial and I want to go in and see their jury selection or something. And it's like, I go in there wearing a polo shirt and jeans, you know what I mean? Or like I roll my sleeves up if I'm wearing a suit and I walk around the office or the court and sit in the gallery. I mean, I adhere to, a certain level of decorum. Like if I go past the bar, like up into the well, like I'll roll my sleeves down, put my jacket on, but it's a pretty, I get no, static whatsoever, but that probably has got more to do with where I'm at and, the age that I am. So.
That's awesome. I'm glad to hear that. We were like that when I was talking with my wife, where I am. So we're close to Philadelphia. And, where we are, it seems like no one really cares. It seems like a lot of people have ink, piercings, no big deal. But people, friends of ours, not too far away, in the industry they work in, it's like, well, if you can't have ink, you got to have the sleeves down or whatever. And it's just like, it's 2024, really? So I'm happy to hear that for you, like it's a non-issue. That's really cool. Cool.
Yeah, it was weird. There is this one friend of mine. He was our traffic safety resource prosecutor, basically like the guy that knows everything about criminal traffic. He worked in Tacoma in the Pierce County. That's where I grew up in Tacoma, but that's just, it's a much more blue collar town and it's much smaller, but but not really conservative politically. But he worked in the Pierce County office. And I guess the boss there, the criminal chief there, was like, you better, be sitting at your desk and wearing your jacket and have your tie on. And so I guess, like down there, like at least under that particular chief, there was a very different, like vibe, but I can't speak firsthand to that.
How difficult is it for you to separate out, a loss in court versus when a person should be, innocent, guilty, or something like that? How difficult is it to separate that out for you?
As a plaintiff's attorney, I am essentially the person with like the least amount of power. Because if I sue, like around here, it's like, who do I sue? I sue Amazon, I sue Microsoft, I sue Meta, I sue all these companies, and Boeing, these companies. And it's like they have all the resources and they can hire a whole team of defense attorneys. And I'm just representing someone and I'm working on a contingent basis. So it's like the power dynamic is like this. I'm down here and they're way up here. When you work for the government, especially as a criminal prosecutor, the power dynamic is all different because now you're the government and you're bringing the action. And so procedurally, it's the same job because the prosecutor is prosecuting the action. In a civil case, the plaintiff's attorney is prosecuting the action. You're the movement. So procedurally, it's the same, but the power dynamic's different. And I had to get used to the fact that the prosecutor has got like a much more heightened ethical responsibilities, like more so than, like what a civil lawyer or even a public defender has, because like a public defender is representing an accused person. And, like civil litigants, we're talking about money. We're not typically talking about people's liberty and their freedom. You know what I mean? So a prosecutor technically has this role. It's as minister of justice. I remember the first time I heard it, I was like, that sounds like a hair metal band from the 80s. Like that sounds like, or it sounds like a Slayer song, but minister of justice, right? But basically what it means is that, I mean, you've probably heard the term Brady violation. It's like we have to give the defense everything that we have. We have to give them everything, especially things that might be exculpatory. You know what I mean? It's like the cardinal sin of being a prosecutor to commit a Brady violation. They just saw like that Alec Baldwin case, that prosecutor there, it looks like committed a Brady violation, and they dumped that case. You know what I mean? His manslaughter case. That's exactly what we're talking about. And so, like getting used to, having that sort of, discretion and responsibility, it's different. You know what I mean? It's, the city of Seattle trusted me, kind of a nobody who worked at a bunch of, low service sector jobs, restaurants and whatnot, and bounced around, and they gave me discretion to to prosecute cases, to dismiss cases, to come up with, so it's.
So I've spoken to a number of attorneys. You're actually the first one in the sequence that'll go live, but I've spoken to a number of attorneys. And it seems like they all have their own practice, which I thought was very interesting. From your experience, people going to law school, do a lot of people then go to start their own firm? Or do a lot of people tend to be in-house counsel? How does that break out? What's more typical, I guess?
So, I mean, these are probably at this point pretty ancient statistics, but I do recall at some point the composition of the WSB active WSBA members, Washington State Bar Association members, are more or less about half either in some sort of solo practice or some pretty small law practice, like a partnership, like a two-person partnership, or even maybe a small boutique firm, something maybe it's 5 or less attorneys, sort of law firm. Kind of just generally that half of us are in pretty small operations. The other half, I think it breaks out more maybe somewhere around 20% of people are working in some aspect of the government. There's a ton of, there's so many layers of the government. There's obviously, attorneys everywhere. I interned at federal places, so it was the EEOC and the Department of Labor, but it's, you got, just as a prosecutor here in the state of Washington, you could work for the Department of Justice, you could work for the state attorney general's office, you could work for the county that you live in, here, King County, you could work for the city of Seattle. That's 4 different, offices that you can be a prosecutor in, that have offices right downtown. So then the remainder, that other, 20-30% or whatever are going to be people in fairly large law firms. So your Davis Wright Tremaine or your Perkins Coie's, here in Seattle specifically, or that's kind of the breakdown. Well, you mentioned in-house. There are the definitely big companies here, Microsoft has got a huge in-house operation, but it's maybe they have a couple hundred attorneys over there, but it's there's, what is it, it's almost 4,000 of us licensed in Washington right now. So percentage wise, it's not really that many people. You know what I mean?
How about this one? What TV show that you've seen most accurately depicts the life of a lawyer?
Better Call Saul. Hands down. Second place isn't even close. The fundamentals of that, are pretty right on. It's he does civil and criminal defense. It's right now, it's technically I'm back on my own, just like Saul, right? Running a solo practice. Since I was a prosecutor and I did DUI trials, I'm a good, like a DUI defense attorney. I'm a good criminal traffic defense attorney and misdemeanor defense attorney. But it's like my main business is civil law, and the public doesn't agree with me because like everybody watches Law and Order, and I think that that's like the least like like actual like law practice, but like it's the most, it's the dramatic one. It's it's definitely the prosecutor friendly like version. It's like like we always get like what I mean, we get our we get the conviction, and it's all wrapped up in 42 minutes, but the reality is much more like like what I think is interesting. And like I just wrote this book, the city attorney's office, the first book is called Professional Camouflage. It's like about what we're doing, just like when we're just screwing around, and it's like that's a much more interesting take on it to me. It's like like what are lawyers doing when they're just it's like The Office, what I mean, like what do they do at The Office, like no, Dunder Miffler, I don't know what they do, they ship papers, I don't know, but the show is funny because of the setting and the people. Anyway, that's what I think anyway.
Sticking with your book, tell us more about that. How did you get your, I'm assuming from your line of work, but how did you get your inspiration for it?
Last year, I released these 3 novellas that, are essentially just the Down and Out in Seattle and Tacoma series. I have another book that was published back about 20 years ago that's been out of print for a while. I have a lot of things sitting in the hopper, but I just, like in March, I finished the first book of like a planned series. It's the city attorney's office series, and it is about a person not dissimilar to me, that goes to work in that same office that I worked in, but at a different time, like earlier on. It's like 2010 when he goes to work there. And the job itself, like once I got to work there, I realized that like it was pretty great fodder for for fiction, and because like here when I went to work here, the thing that really struck me odd about the office is that the public defenders there, what I mean, like they're good attorneys. A lot of them are brand new attorneys, but they tend to like hire like Ivy League kids like right out of school. And the prosecutor's office tends to hire like more seasoned attorneys, but usually people with like different pedigrees, like people that went to like state schools like I did. And so, and it's a prosecutor's office, but, like we're all pretty like left leaning. We're union members. We have a union there. And it's like the public defenders, kind of come at us with this, like, they're really a lot of them like real true believers, and they come at us like we're the worst people in the world. And it always struck me odd that it's like a bunch of left leaning, like prosecutors in the city of Seattle are somehow like these people's worst enemy. And it's like politically there's so many worse enemies for you to go after. If you're over here, you know what I mean, like there's tons of people that are way over here, and it's like we're like kind of right here, but this inner like like intra like almost intra ideological spectrum where it's like like you're essentially going after people that are like like most of the prosecutors are pretty nice prosecutors when it comes to and so anyway, the interplay between that and between like like the municipal court, which just like really I don't even know if like law gets practiced there. I mean, a lot of times it feels like judges are making things up from the bench, and so you never really know what you're walking into. You're like, what like what judge am I going to see? What rules are at play here? What non-rules? I refer to it as kangaroo court in the book. And I guarantee that, like by this point, a lot of the people down there have read that book, and I've made hundreds of new enemies in the last few months. But it was a good reason why I also needed to get out of that office. So
did you go down the self-publish route? Did you use a traditional publisher? How did that work for you?
No, after the book in 2002 that was traditionally published, I didn't have a good experience with that. I don't feel like they did much to move the book. I mean, I get that impression from most people, like they're, big publishing houses will publish a lot of books, but they don't really get behind ones that don't really kind of catch fire on their own, and or that aren't like, like written by people that are like they're known, like talent, known commodities, things that they know will move, so you're pretty much on your own anyway. So at some point I just like I just, like I run a law firm, and it's like I know obviously how to file the paperwork. I just opened a company. I just made my own publishing company. So that's blandcoffeepublishing.com. So technically, I guess if you look, like behind the curtain, it's more or less, like I'm self-publishing, like these books. But, like on the surface, if you're looking at it, it's publishing house. So.
Okay, that's interesting. You're actually the second person I spoke to that created their own publishing company, which is really, really cool.
Yeah.
What was that process like? I'm assuming it's like starting any other business, so you got to follow all the necessary paperwork. But other than that, are there any other additional hurdles you had to go through to be a publishing company?
Not really. I mean, you file the LLC paperwork, you set up your website, all pretty straightforward stuff. The thing about it is the hardest thing about it is learning to use the actual like publishing tools. So there, like learning how to use the typesetting tool. Learning how to like you try to figure out like what you can and can't do yourself, like book covers. I made some attempts at trying to like do them myself, and I was pretty successful with with the professional camouflage cover. But even then, it's like like I was able to, like on KDP, I was able to format it correctly and get it, like published like that. But like when I went to the other, like, like print on demand service, the one that has all the distributors to like the indie bookstores and whatnot, it's Ingram Spark. I could not figure out their tool. So I had to hire someone to take the cover that I had made and like format it for me. So it cost me a couple $100, but, figuring out like, like what can I figure out and what should I, like spend a few dollars to get someone to do for me, like that was a learning curve. The editor is absolutely like you have to find an editor. You can just, like anybody that reads books, if you pick up a book, even someone that writes really well, you pick it up and you look at it, you can just tell like, like this wasn't edited, this wasn't, like, so, I think that, as far as like selling books goes, you know what I mean? Like, the first and last thing most people are ever going to see about your book is your cover. So you got to do that right. And once they start reading your book, if it looks like you didn't pay a professional editor to edit it, that book's going in the, like do not finish pile. So
I forgot to mention this earlier, and I love hearing when people change careers at some point later in life. So what was it like for you actually going back to law school, having been away from that world for so long? What was that like now that you were older, maybe had a family?
yeah, it was even, I mean, it was a bigger learning curve, I think, than even a lot of people that are kind of like your garden variety going back, like to school at a later time sort of person. Because so when I was younger, I mean, this too, and I don't mind sharing this, and if you don't want it, in your podcast, you can clip it out. But I'm an alcoholic. I've been sober for like well over 20 years. I struggled with addiction, alcoholism, and like I didn't even, when I was a kid, like all I really cared about was listening to punk rock records, going to skate all day. I dropped out of high school when I was in ninth grade. I just wasn't interested, and I didn't go back. I went back to a couple community colleges here and there when I was like 19, 20, 21. Basically, I just bounced around to the same sort of like minimum wage jobs for quite a while. And then I got into recovery, and that's when I worked as an EMT and paramedic. And I did that for a long time. Did that until I met my wife. And my wife, she was, like is a professional woman. We got married, and I started saying, well, I think that I could probably do something more here. And she's like, well, do it. And so I went back to Seattle Central Community College, which is right up the road from where we live in Capitol Hill in Central Seattle. And, I had to do a lot of remedial courses, just to get up to college level, and then I got through there, and I did pretty well grade point average wise. And, I applied to get into to University of Washington, which I figured was not very likely. It's a public school, but it's a good public school. And, they're pretty selective, but I got in. So I got in there, I got into an honors program. I was in the political science, department. That was my major. And, I started to close in on graduating there. And I was like, I think I'd like to go to law school. And Laura's like, yeah, go ahead, do it, and so I applied. I went up the road, the Jesuit university up the road at Seattle University, and they have a law school. UW has a law school, SU has a law school, Gonzaga has a law school. Those are the three law schools in Washington. UW and SU are the only ones that are close because Gonzaga is way over on the other side of the mountains. But so I applied, I got in. But it was steep. It was a steep learning curve, because there was just basic fundamental things that other people just knew because they just gone to school and graduated from high school and went to college that like I just didn't know, and I was older than a lot of people in in class. So I mean, still, even to this day, I remember my first year I was in law school, I was like trying to like find something in this document, and this guy that was much younger than me, I was like, I can't find this word in this document. I'm like, I'm trying to figure out, and he's like, hit Control F, and I like hit it, and the search came up, and he's like, I was like, does that work for everything? He's like, basically. And I was like, I didn't even know, you know what I mean? That's 2012, you know what I mean? And I didn't even know, how to like word search something in an electronic document. So
Christopher, that's an awesome story, and I'm sure it had its challenges, obviously, getting through all of that. But it makes for a really, really great story, and serves for a great line for inspiration, I think. I am running a little short on time, so I would like to take about a minute or two. If there's something that you would like to talk about, a project you're working on, a cause you believe in, more about your books that you're writing or your business, I'd like to hand the microphone over to you.
this is the new book. This is the book one, Professional Camouflage. So this one is very nice. This is like a jacketed, like cloth, hardcover, very professional, very cool. It's got the Bland Coffee logo in there. I'm wearing the Bland Coffee shirt. So it's blandcoffeepublishing.com. It's down and out in Seattle and Tacoma books are about like a Gen X guy who is, suffering with, alcoholism, drug addiction. It's not a very uplifting story, but it's a very real story. It's 3 novellas, and they're in one volume as the Down and Out in Seattle and Tacoma series, or individually as Sleep in the Daytime, Court of Mediocrity, Squatting in the Shadow of an Ant. This book series here is more uplifting, I guess. I guess it's kind of an alternative sort of romance, maybe like kind of a dark comedy, romance, workplace comedy. It's a pre-planned series, so the second book I'm about halfway through writing. That should be available by 2020, the beginning of 2025, and I anticipate at least 3 to 5 of those. So
I'll make sure I get all the links from you. I'll put them in the show notes, the description. I'll put them on my website, so when people are looking for it, they can easily find you.
Awesome.
Christopher, it's been absolutely awesome talking to you on Time We Discuss. We learned what it was like to be a prosecutor as well as an author.
Thanks for having me.